So welcome to the Industry Matters Theatre at Imbibe Live. I'm Robyn Black, former editor of Imbibe magazine at imbibe.com, and we're here to talk about diversity and inclusion and why it's essential in the workplace. Actually, we've got quite a small audience, which I suppose is why we exactly need to be talking about it and keep talking about it. So welcome to my panel. I'm going to let you introduce yourselves, actually, because I'm sure you'll do it better than me. So Hannah, do you want to start your end and we'll work up?
1, 2, 1, 2. Hello, I'm Hannah Lanfear. I am the founder of the Mixing Class, and I deal in spirits education by and large.
Hello, Deano Moncrieffe. I am the founder of Equal Measures UK, and this is my education partner right here. So we work closely together.
Hi. Yeah, sorry. Hi, my name's Sebastian. I'm currently head of brand for Served Drinks, which is a hard seltzer, and also the founder of a platform called Celebrate Her, which is to support women in the hospitality industry.
And just check, yep, this is working. Hello, my name is Declan. I am the commercial director for a little distillery in Northern Ireland called Boatyard Distillery. And even though I look very, very young, I've been working in the industry now for 20 years and have had an array of different positions and places throughout.
Brilliant. Well, I crack on with the questions. I will open for questions at the end, so if anyone's got any questions, we'll do them towards the end of the panel session. So let's start with a big question. How did we get to this position in the first place, where an industry that's about hospitality still isn't as hospitable and welcoming to everyone as it should be, and why are we still talking about it? Deano, do you want to start off with that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I think that the answer is that we got to a point where, you know, our fantastic industry that we work in and that we love just doesn't reflect the society that it serves. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I think sometimes you can look at recruitment strategies, you can look at how we use data, and sometimes, unfortunately, big companies and organisations can use data in the wrong way, so they can tick a box and say that we employ a certain amount of people from different backgrounds, but then when you look at those jobs, they're not actually jobs that are progressive. They're not progressive as they should be, i.e. management roles, senior leadership roles, and the percentage of people of colour, for example, within management roles and senior management roles in the UK is very, very low. It's under 5%. And if you think about, you know, London as a demographic, it's over 60% of the population is of colour. So there's a massive disparity there if you look at those numbers. So I think there's work to be done, but a lot of it starts at the top with recruitment strategies, with education, but it's also about, you know, what culture do you want to have in your workplace? And maybe that's something that we haven't looked at in depth is the culture that you want to have within your workplace. It needs to be inclusive, it needs to be rewarding, but it needs to be a safe culture and a place where people can learn and grow.
Hannah, safe culture is something you work quite hard around as well. Is that?
Yeah, definitely. So I have ADHD, and that means that I tend to bite off way too much than I can chew. So diversity is something that I'm really passionate about. Neurodiversity, better diversity for people who are LGBTQIA, and how they can be themselves and show their identity in their work. And of course, I also work with Deano. So, you know, a lot of the work that I do on top of spirits education is about trying to make sure that people can be seen and be themselves and express themselves within our industry and celebrate themselves. Yeah, I think that equates to a safe space in a way, you know, is being able to be seen.
So in terms of changes we need to make, it sounds like we need to make some big changes. Declan, do you kind of think that's...
I think certainly it is. I think for me, this sort of topic, I think the important thing is that there's more conversation and people aren't intimidated as well. That if, you know, for example, you're a hiring manager and you feel that you don't have the right mix, that you should be comfortable and confident enough to just talk about that not feel that you're going to get persecuted for it, and then have the conversation, how can you fix that? And I think it's this removing it as a taboo. The fact that we're not slammed here is probably because some people are maybe a bit intimidated by it and as a topic. And I think we had a call last week and Deano just said it's just about talking and talking things through. But the other big area is everything does come from the top, and there needs to be the right direction at the top. And that certainly seems to be the area where most likely change is required as well.
Yeah, I think, sorry, just to interrupt that, I think generally, I don't know about you guys, as a society, we're very uncomfortable with having these conversations, and we need to become comfortable in uncomfortable situations. So if you imagine, if you only play tennis once a year, chances are you're going to be pretty bad at playing tennis. Whereas if we are having these conversations ongoing on a daily, on a weekly basis, then I think we're going to get better at this. And I think the other thing is a lot of hospitality venues are bound a lot by tradition and corporate structure. And I think that's incredibly dangerous. If you look at a corporate structure, it's almost, and I'll compare it to something that I know very well. It's like a disease that you never knew that you had. And in order for this disease to sort of change, you need to make these lifestyle changes in order to get better. And the reason why I use this analogy is when I was younger, I had something called Graves' disease, which is quite an unknown disease, but the only way to get better is actually to change your lifestyle around it. And I really could relate that to sort of these corporate structures. And for an industry that prides ourselves, that talks a lot about being, you know, embracing change and culture, let's have an orientation and we're a family and all of this, we actually don't do that much. So I think Declan made a really good point, the fact that this is for a talk, it's not as busy as we wanted, and I think people feel uncomfortable being like, have I said the wrong thing? Is this the right verbiage? And all of these things, and it's just like, we need to start by having these conversations, and yeah, we will get it wrong, but in order to get it right, we have to kind of go through that process, I think.
And big changes are quite scary, though. Are there small changes that people can be making on the ground every day to improve this? Anyone want to take that?
I could. I have to have a crack. I think so much of the absence of diversity is simply that, like you say, in corporations, in structures, in companies, they're not trying to break down unconscious biases actively.
Yeah.
And you know, things like taking names off of CVs and not looking at things like ethnicity, and actually taking a CV, working through it and basing that on merit, regardless of gender, regardless of ethnicity. Because the people that are reading the CVs don't realise that they're sorting them into an unconscious pile of, oh, these people sound familiar, that feels safe to me, or these people don't sound familiar, that doesn't feel safe to me. This person sounds like they might not be able to hold 3 cases of beer, but I've not given them a chance to prove that they can. So, you know, these things happen accidentally all the time. The systems can be created to take that away, to take those unconscious biases away. And I think it's important that we start figuring that one out.
And Deano, you've worked in big corporations and now you've got your own business. I mean, have you learned anything either way? So things you took out of a bigger business that you brought to your own, or do you think you're doing good stuff now that bigger businesses definitely need to take hold of?
I think the main thing that the big difference is making sure that there are multiple conversations around just checking in with people, you know, checking in with my team to make sure they're comfortable, making sure that they know that it's a safe place. So I always talk to them a lot about, my team a lot about, you know, progressing, feeling that they can progress in areas that they probably thought that they couldn't. We have lots of regular check-ins, lots of one-to-ones, but they are functional. Because I think sometimes when you work for a big company, you can have a one-to-one with your line manager that you see every 2 months, and they cram that session in when they've got to do a lot of other one-to-ones, and then they tick the box and then it's done and then nothing gets happened, and you go, oh, do you remember we spoke about that a few months ago? And they're like, oh yeah, sorry, I didn't get a chance to action anything. So, you know, I think for me it's just making sure that you understand the importance of your team and making sure that everyone is treated as an individual. And it, you know, I'm not talking about, I've worked for large organisations in the past and I'm not being negative about them, because it's just the nature the big beast, to keep things working, to keep things going. Sometimes that attention to detail and that personal touch goes out of the window. I think all of us here have personalities that want to help other people grow, and that, again, if you have a leadership team or you have someone around you who you feel they can help you grow, that's the very first step.
What about mentoring? That's often brought up as important when it comes to inclusivity. Declan, you do a bit of mentoring, don't you?
Yeah, I take part in the Equal Measures Opportunity organisation that Deano and Hannah have formed. And my mentee, Lucas, is a great guy. He's going to go very far. First thing I said to him, I said, so why are we doing this? And he goes, well, there's not many people of my colour in senior positions in the drinks business. And I loved how upfront he was, and he just said that straight away. And he's clearly going to go very, very far. We have great sessions, the way he describes what he's doing, and he is going to go far. But I think that we've achieved a great deal that someone is willing to publicly say that now as well, and the fact that they've got the scheme set up and running. When we talk about small changes, those are the small changes that are rolling, and just making that, that is the goal. He wants to be a senior manager in a company. What can we do to help him get there?
Well, let's talk about Equal Measures then. We talk about how it started and what you offer and what you do and all the work you put in.
So we both work together on the Equal Measures project, and Equal Measures is Deano's forum, and I'll let him talk about that. But ultimately, I have a really strong belief that if you want to create diverse working cultures, then education needs to be an important part of that. Mentorship needs to be an important part of that. You need to equip people as well as possible for success. And I think it can be very easy for, and I'm kind of like going back on what I said earlier about CVs, but it's an important point. I think the two things sort of go together, that you do not hire in a tokenistic way, because if you like, right, I need to tick that box, let me hire a gay person, let me hire, a black person, and then we end up in a situation where those people don't feel supported at all, because you haven't created a culture where they can be themselves, they can express their identity. So if you want to hire for diversity, you need to create a culture of diversity, and that means doing lots more than just hiring a person, letting them feel, jaded with this system, feeling tokenistic, and you need to actually build, a welcoming environment that welcomes all and around.
Come on, Deano.
Hannah said it perfectly, but so Equal Measures was formed last year to just raise awareness around the importance of diversity and inclusion within the hospitality industry. The Equal Measures project, as it is now, is something that Hannah and I have worked on really hard to make sure. The idea and the goal is to have 120 students per year who sign up. Anyone who feels like they've experienced a barrier in their progression can sign up and get in touch with us, and we will help educate them through WSET level 2, level 3, and even personal licensing. There's many more courses that we're going to be doing, and then everybody who joins the group will have a wonderful mentor such as Declan. So, and we basically ask the students where they want to go, what they want to achieve, and then from that we pair them with, and we've got such an amazing list of mentors that are just like, it's really we're going to ask Anna after the session. But yeah, so we've got these amazing people who are so passionate about giving back and wanting to help people progress, and yeah, that's how it was set up. We've got a long way to go, but it's small steps, and I think just there are barriers out there, right? So I think it's really clear to me, and I'm actually very quickly going to tell you something that happened to me. I'm not going to mention the company, but I was working for a long time, and I was having a regular annual sort of review of my performance. 5 years in a row, my performance was exceptional and exceeding expectations, and then I still stayed in the job for 5 years. So how can you be exceptional at your job, continue to exceed expectations, and then stay in the same role that you're in for 5 years, which is a question that I asked my HR department, and I didn't get the answers that I wanted, and from that moment I knew that I was going to have to leave the company. But that shouldn't happen, right? It shouldn't happen to anyone. If you are excelling and you are doing more than you could, if your line manager is saying you're doing a really great job again, and I'm saying, okay, great, what's next? And then you just keep having that conversation. Imagine doing that 5 years, you just go, okay, well, the ceiling is definitely here, and I think, you know, it's how can I get through this? And you know, you have conversations about how you can break through that ceiling with your HR department, and it goes round and round in circles. That can't happen, and that's why Equal Measures is here. That's why we're sitting here. We're trying to change that and preventing that from happening. Everyone should feel like they can fulfil their true potential.
And I mean, Anna, you know, did you have any moments, not with, like, where you just looked at where you were working and thought, oh God, there's a problem here, and I need to start working on it?
Yeah, I think, you know, I come from a very corporate hotel background. I worked in a couple of hotels over the last sort of 11 years, and whilst there's been a huge amount of progress, I don't think there's been enough. And the environments that I've worked in have, a lot of them have been based on how this person looks. And it's a terrible thing to hear from above. I'm not sure if they have the right look for the environment that we're in. And it's 2021. Like, how can we still be having these conversations? And I think we get into this habit of being scared to have an opinion, because when you have an opinion, you kind of get pigeonholed in this box of being a troublemaker. I'm this troublemaker that I have this opinion, but which Declan knows, we worked together for a long time. I'm sure you need to pick your moments, but when you know that something is inherently wrong, you need to be that person that stands up and goes, that isn't right. And it isn't always easy, and yeah, you may need to leave this job, or you may need to kind of move on, but you will find that place where you're meant to be. And for every time you speak up, you actually do have an impact and actually do change things for other people. And it isn't easy, but that does need to happen. And I think just to touch on the thing of females in hospitality, like, you know, I am very passionate about this. I try my best to encourage as many women as possible to join what was once a male-dominated industry. And yes, we are changing, and there's so much more space. But I still think there's a long way to go. We need to get more women into management, into leadership positions, and we need to be supporting women through this process, because I think, you know, especially when you get to like a certain age, like 30-ish, you start thinking, maybe I want to have a family, but I'm sure Declan will talk about this. And, you know, but where's the support when you get to a point, like if I want to have a kid and I still want to work in the operations, like where is that support for me? And that is still, you know, we need to be looking at these other groups of diversity and equality and actually giving people that sort of support for it. So the topic is so huge, it's so diverse, and you know, we had this conversation about supporting parents within the hospitality industry as well, because why should somebody have to leave just because they want to have a kid and want to be a good parent as well?
Could I add an extra point to that as well? And I think that even today, there is still in our industry the idea that people who are natural leaders look or sound a certain way, and it's classist, and quite often it's quite sexist, and if your voice is deeper than another, then maybe you'll get the job. So we're sort of excluding, and I can say this as a gay person, right? People like sissies who are perhaps perceived as more effeminate men, they don't get promoted into management positions. I'm not saying not always, but there is an extra thing to push through for that. Women as well, people of colour, it's still happening, and I think we perceive people to have natural leadership depending on physical attributes, and that's not fair.
Yeah.
It's just not fair.
And there are a few areas around inclusion, so some get more airtime than others. So funny you mentioned neurodiversity earlier. I mean, what are the other, maybe I was, you know, people with disabilities sometimes don't get called out in this space as much as they should. I mean, what's the full gamut we should be thinking about?
Well, I mean, let's be real, cocktail bars tend to be in basements, downstairs, and I remember doing Gin Journey once, which I did for a little while, and I was taking people on tours, and I met a lovely lady who was like, my husband really loves cocktails, and I was like, why didn't you bring him? I said, well, he uses a wheelchair, and all of the cocktail bars are downstairs, so he actually cannot come. He can't come, and he always can't come when she goes out for cocktails. So physically, cocktails are very difficult to access. I think in terms of, well, it's for words now, which doesn't happen very often. You know, in very many ways, despite the fact that we think of ourselves as quite a progressive, forward-thinking industry, we do have hang-ups and we do have prejudices, and that means that for, you know, gay women, sometimes being in a bar space can feel a little bit predatory or like you are being watched. Or I'm code switching all the time when I hold my wife's hand walking down the street. We'll pass someone, we're judging them. We're like, oh, we'll stop holding hands now because I don't want to be seen holding hands by this person. We did it once when a dog was looking at us. We're like, oh, that might be a homophobic dog, so we'll just stop holding hands. But you're constantly doing that. You're always jumpy about it. And being in bar spaces, you can feel that scrutiny that makes you feel uncomfortable. And I think that goes for people of minorities of very many different kinds.
And what about if you're in the industry and you're in that situation, where exists now for help? Where do you go to get some, to equal measures obviously, but are there other bright spots of movements and organisations in the industry that people should be looking to go to? Deano?
You go for it, Deano.
Equal measures, basically. This is one of the big areas for me, and there's a couple of things to just add. So, equality and diversity and inclusion is not just based around, you know, the reason we're sitting here is not just because we're talking about the colour of someone's skin. It's a very, very broad topic. The reason why there's probably only, there's a decent amount of people here, but not packed out as you would like it to be, is because I don't think people really understand what diversity and inclusion means and what equality means. It's broad, right? So it's like Anna was saying, it's like Hannah was saying, and Declan and we had this conversation last week. You know, parents, new parents, you know, people of different colours, and actually let's think about, you know, the equality from the side of people who may be slightly from a disadvantaged background, and maybe not have the education that they need. Just because somebody hasn't been educated to a certain level doesn't mean that they can't excel within our industry. There are so many different areas within our industry where people can excel. So it's, you know, that to me is such a massive part of what we're doing. From having areas where people can go. The Drinks Trust is one, definitely, for help. The Drinks Trust is a big organisation that is there for anyone who has any sort of issues. You know, they're a great resource to be able to help people from financially, from mental health point of view as well. But obviously equal measures. But the main thing is you need to have mentors. Right? You need to have people you can look up to. You need, you should be able to go to your line manager, your friend, your colleague. You need to create that space within your own working environment as well.
I just remembered. If you work in a venue, if you're a manager or an owner and you're interested in making your venue more accessible to anyone in the LGBTQIA community, then there are really good resources on gendered intelligence, and that goes for guests but also staff members as well, right? It's not just guests that we're thinking about. And there's also Gallup, which is a Good Night Out campaign. My wife worked on it a bit, and that is really, really useful and very helpful.
So Gallup is an amazing resource. I think a lot of people don't know that it exists, but it gives really good, hardcore sort of data. It gives a lot of case studies. They work with organisations in order to sort of provide that. So a lot of intelligence. I think there are a lot of resources at the moment, but I don't think there's enough, and I think we need to continue. I think the best resources are also going to come from ourselves as well, and we have a duty to make that stand, to call people out. And, when you are in that position where you can make decisions, it's to make those right decisions as well and be an ambassador for that change, because without change, nothing's going to happen. And it is about, like I said in the beginning, you need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and have these conversations. And if you're not sure, then ask. And I think that's the biggest thing. It's all our responsibilities to make this industry better.
Brilliant. We've only got a few minutes left, so I'm opening it up for questions to the audience. If anyone's got a question, you want to put your hand up, we'll get a microphone to you. It's got to be wiped down now.
Yeah.
Hi, Jordan. I'm really interested to see that we've been at a panel about diversity and inclusion, and aside from very brief mentions in what you were saying a moment ago, we avoided the words of sexism, homophobia, racism, ableism, as if they were complete taboo. We have to tread on eggshells around them. And aside from hearing that you can support 120 students a year through your program, you've given zero advice onto how, as a business, we can directly address the lack of diversity, the lack of inclusion, and the lack of accessibility to opportunities in this industry. I wonder if the panel can give some direct advice to people who possibly don't live in London, who might not be able to support one of 120 students in a year into getting into that program. How can we as a business do that, aside from doing things like, getting rid of gender pronouns on application statuses and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and I think that and I don't think I'm going to give you a perfect answer to what you're asking, because I think it is a very tough question to answer, but the one thing I do think at the moment is that the drinks industry has got the most unique opportunity it's ever had, in the sense that this time last year, a lot of people were getting made redundant, and right now there's a lot of jobs available, and the employees have the power for the first time. And where I think that we need to see is to encourage some accountability, and to, I think if media could, rather than just articles, could actually work on the accountability and do things such as awarding or grading employers for their skills, whether it be on their diversity policies, what they actually do, so that then the big corporate worlds, for example, will be talking their language, it will be accountable, and without making it sound futile, scoring it, so that those good employees can see, and that there is, that like a TripAdvisor does for a restaurant when you're going out for dinner, that there is a classification system saying, if you want to go and work in X venue, this is their score as an employer, and this is what they do. And I think that there are a lot of awards out there for best cocktail, best bartender. I'd love to see an award and a system rewarding best employers and holding those accountable.
I would add to that I would encourage you to reach out directly, because there's only so much that talking about diversity does. Really, it's in the actions and it's in the doing. And that's why we don't really talk anywhere near as much about diversity as we do the work. So I think if you would get in touch with us, you don't need to support someone through the Equal Measures campaign. We've done the fundraising. And honestly, finding people that can come and do the Equal Measures campaign is the hardest part of it. So if you know people who would like to start giving some lift off to their career, put them in touch with us. We'd love to help them do that.
Just one quick thing to say for me, because I know there's another question here. So it's a good question and provocation. The answer is, to be perfectly honest, when we had a pre-meeting about today, we've only got half an hour. So it's a really tough thing to get everything in there. There's only so many answers that you can give. So we had to go through the questions that we thought were relevant, the topics that we thought were relevant. If we had 2 hours, we would get some solutions, and you could leave here with whatever it is that you would want. But one thing I will say is that Equal Measures is not just about 120 students. So I work closely with huge organisations, from international football clubs to international banks, and I'm sitting there talking to them about recruitment strategies, helping them to build their questionnaires that they're asking their employees around diversity and inclusion. There's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes, but there's only so much you can talk about in half an hour. But every single one of us here is doing something. It takes one person to make a difference, and I know that the person that Declan is actually mentoring now, Hannah and I had this conversation, right? So we had a conversation with our students. Every single one of our students came back to us and said, thank you for doing what you're doing. We are now going to try and do something as well to be mentors for somebody else. That's the knock-on effect that it has, and that's what we can do. So it's small steps. We can't do it all, but just one thing at a time will make a big difference. There's another question. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think that, no, there's
Another question somewhere? Oh, wipe down microphone.
Hi, my name is Richard. I work for LWC Drinks, decent sized name in the industry, obviously. I am also in senior management. And I think one thing I've been to many diversity and inclusion talks in different industries actually. The one thing that always irks me is that we talk about having a conversation, but then the conversation is about having a conversation a lot of the time. And another thing is diversity isn't always about who we should hire and the people that work for the company. It's understanding why we want to, other than just making up the numbers. It's about the perspectives that they bring. So, for example, you talk about cocktail clubs all being downstairs, something that's the same in Manchester where I'm from. Weirdly enough, unless you are disabled and unless you have experienced that, it's something that can easily slip your mind, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just because you've never had to deal with that before, so you wouldn't think about it when maybe building or setting up that business. So I think it's more than a question. It's more of just a viewpoint. It's coming from someone that's been to all these before. It's when you next have a conversation, maybe try and focus on what someone from the LGBT community can bring, what perspective someone like myself can bring to an industry that maybe doesn't have much representation.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point, and I think a lot of it is about educating ourselves. I think my biggest experience that I learned so much from during lockdown, I was volunteering for a homeless organisation that actually, in some weird sort of twist of fate, it ended up being with a lot of focus on hospitality people that had lost their jobs because of COVID. So every single night during lockdown, we went out onto the streets, and as you can imagine, it was completely desolate. And when I started meeting homeless people that had been made redundant from hospitality venues, it was probably my biggest experience of diversity in hospitality. And that's over the course. I've been working in hospitality for probably the best part of 20 years. And the education that I was able to get from that was huge, and it really changed my perception and humbled me a lot. Arrogantly, you think you know everything. I've got this award, and actually none of that means anything, because what you're taught, hospitality is easy when you're in a beautiful room, but when you're not and everything's stripped back, you're actually meeting people that are educating you so much. And for me, that I learned a lot about that, and I was educated so much in different opinions, people from all around the world that you were interacting with every single night. And at the end of the day, there's not that much difference. Whether you're serving in a 5-star hotel or you're serving somebody on the streets, the difference is very minimal. But actually, what you learn in that situation is to be open to this change, to be accepting that most of the time you're not right, and also your opinion, this unconscious bias that maybe we're born with, maybe we just accept, is actually not the right way to be. And I think you made a really good point, and I think yes, we can have conversations about conversations, and the point that you made was fantastic, and we actually have to start sort of doing this. And I think Dino's point about it's small steps to get to that, and we're all still learning as well, but we need to expose ourselves to these situations and be, I guess, open to all of this change and different opinions and different perspectives as well.
Yeah, just on that, so, because it is a really valid point, when we had the conversation about having this talk, it was what definite solutions are we going to offer people? That's what we said when we were talking about it, okay? How can we help people? But it's not, unless people are asking a question, unless we're sharing our experiences, we can't, it wouldn't be a session if we just had a list of places to help people listed on the board behind us, on the screen behind us. Has to be questions, has to be this sort of conversation, and we can learn from that, and then make sure that the next session that we have is more progressive. But there's a lot of work that goes into even just being here and talking about this for half an hour, because you have to try and think about so much to try and make it worthwhile for you guys. And I do hope that there is some value in stuff that we share with you, because there are places that you can reach out, there are resources, but each one of us, if anyone here who has anything that has affected them, or they feel like they don't have the answers, you can get in touch with us directly, and I guarantee you that we will come back to you, for sure.
Yeah, go on.
Just one reply to you, because I think your point was really important and should be echoed somewhat. I think the entire point of this is that by having a more diverse team, we're stronger. And that is the important thing. And I think you're completely right. We didn't open with that, but in diversity, there's beauty and there is strength, and that is why we're doing what we do. So thank you for making that point.
Thank you everyone for turning up. Obviously we did only have half an hour, so I'm sorry about that. If you didn't catch the whole panel, this is being filmed, so it will be on the Imbibe Live website after the show, so you can watch it again. And otherwise, thank you all very much for joining us.